Hello YouTube, this is my part 2 of my dissection of a Stefan Molyneux on morality versus violence. And this is a slightly, if not particularly more theoretically and hardcore philosophical approach to understanding morality and let's say with regards to Hume's is-ought gap, which is a very, very core aspect of philosophy. And I want to point out certain aspects with relation to what we just discussed in, what I discussed in my recent video. And if you look at this presentation, and don't worry, it is not as complex as it may look, but I need some additional text to help me get through it, so it won't be too I keep on a straight line rather than trying to figure it out as I go. So there's a little more text that might be necessary as just as a simple illustration, but it will help me clarify what I'm talking about. So, okay, if we are talking about morality and ethics, first of all, to me, ethics is the philosophy you do to arrive at a moral principle. Morality is that area that it's advantageous to talk about it as a geographical or area, two-dimensional area, right? Where nothing immoral happens. That's morality, right? That's where morality is. But how do we know the delineations of what is moral and immoral? And that reaches back to an understanding of what is really morality. What are we talking about? And in my opinion, what we're talking about when we're talking about morality is an adjustment of your actions so the outcome is balanced, right? Or you could also say that you are not yourself taken advantage of, that you get at least the benefit you deserve from that particular action. Now that should maybe I shouldn't say benefit, but I could say consequence or a result or something like that. And that might be both positive and negative. In fact, every consequence comes with a combination of positives and negatives, right? And usually we try to find that action that leads to a consequence that gives us most benefit and least bad stuff, right? But if I'm interacting with somebody else, I don't want to pay $1 million for a carrot, right? So I want to make sure that there's a balance in that interaction. And how do we go about adjusting that behavior so that it becomes balanced? And I would say that that's the delineation you as a philosopher of morality or ethics, or do the ethics that lead to that morality or that moral principle, the principle that which delineates within which morality can flourish, right? That's the job of an ethicist of ethical philosophy, right? To find that principle that guides you to when you are jumping to the other side, right? Or not jumping, that may be too explicit, but when you are sort of trespassing to the wrong side, then you are either getting too little compared to what you should, or you're getting too much compared to what you should, right? So this is a problem that has been, going on since the time, at least, of Socrates, 2,500 years ago. And another very important philosopher had an insight, a guy called David Hume, who said that you can't get an ought from an is. And this is, in my opinion, the most important insight in morality, or it puts the toughest blocking in the road towards a moral principle. Because what it says is you can't observe reality and from that deduce any kind of moral judgment. You can't look at reality and say, this is where the delineation of morality is, to put it sort of at a slightly interpretation, right? There's a very famous quote in his book, A Treatise of Human Nature. You can go back and watch I have a couple of videos about Hume's is-ought gap that what's the word? I encourage you to go and watch. But basically what Hume says, oughts or moral judgments or delineations of moral behavior is not perceptible. They are imperceptible. That means you can't observe them, right? You can't observe morality. You can only say, now that elephant is there, now that knife is there, now that individual is there, now the sky is there, now there's a UFO there, there's a bowl of oatmeal here. That's all you can do. You can't say, and there is morality, right? And this is a recurring problem in morality, or ethics, I should say, right? That whenever people try to justify that moral delineation, they always make this fallacy. They commit this fallacy of saying, I'm experiencing that, and that is immoral. They just experience something, and then they say, as if they experienced that immorality, that as if they saw that delineation. They can't, because it's not observable. And I completely agree with Hume that it's imperceptible, or it can't be perceived. It's not empirical. It's not something you can either see or taste or hear or smell or touch, right? None of that, so it can't be empirical. So when you are empirical, what you cannot do in that empiricism is arrive at any moral conclusion. Okay, so what the areas I am pointing to here are, if we take the top part, the green area, and then there's a sort of a borderline, the box with the X in, and then below that there's a red area, so to say, right? And above that is moral, and below that is immoral. And to get from moral to immoral, there has to be something. There has to be something, some way or another, that enables me to determine whether or not I am on the right side of that line. That's an imaginary line, right? Something. I can observe it. And I can't ask anybody, right? There's nothing I can do empirically that can make me arrive at that point, right? But now I'm saying, okay, but you need something. There is something you need. You need something to say, this is why I can say it's moral or immoral, right? And I need it because I want to make sure that there's a balance in my interactions. At least I don't get, pissed on, right? So if I call that which is needed to make that determination an X, then I would say that that X needs a moral principle to be identified. You need some principle to say that. Maybe it is the moral principle itself, you could say, but let's just call it X for simplicity, right? The moral principle is what I need to determine whether or not the X is there or not. The ought, you could say, or the ought not, right? But that's a little more complicated. I will get back to that. And that's the gap. This is ought gap. This is Hume's, he points out there's a gap between what you experience and what you moralize about, right? When you moralize, you have stepped over that line with the X. And if you haven't pointed out how you arrived at that X, you are in error, right? You are fooling yourself. You are babbling without understanding what you're doing. And the gap can only be closed by correctly identifying the X. And the X needs, in my opinion, what I would call a moral principle. And a moral principle can only be arrived at by doing ethics, which is the philosophy needed to arrive at a moral principle. And also you could go further down the line and say, you can't do ethics without doing epistemology, and you can't do epistemology without doing metaphysics. So you see, it all winds back to the starting point, which is the deepest level of metaphysics. And if you go wrong with that metaphysics, you will for certainly go wrong about this X, and then you will screw up morality, right? Okay, so let's say that we have a moral principle and I have just found that X, and I have said, well, this morality, this X, I can add that X to this situation, and the is, which is up here, I quote in the green area, that the is what is there, and when I add that X, I sort of adds an ought or an ought not to stay in the phrases of Hume. Then the immorality or the immoral situation is that there's an is plus the X. I have attached in my mind, I have attached this X to the situation, which has created situation that ought to be or situation that ought not to be, depending on the situation. Okay, these kinds of situations are what the examples that Stefan Molyneux uses in UPB, where he uses situations like rape, theft, assault, and murder. But the problem is, rape is immoral sex, right? Theft is immoral apprehension of stuff, right? Assault is immoral violence, right? A murder is immoral killing, right? Which is the same as saying is plus X, is plus X, is plus X, or action plus X, action plus X, action plus X, and action plus X, right? So when he without pointing out where that X or how he arrived at that X, he drags in these rape, theft, assault, and murder and says they are immoral, but he doesn't explain the X part because he hasn't bridged the gap, right? So he's just using the terms because they already have an imbued sense of immorality. And then he says they are kind of violence. They are kind of violence because they are immoral. So you could say that violence could be defined as action plus X, right? Action plus X. You could say an action is a kind of is that changes because of human intervention during a time frame within a situation, right? So it is a sort of special, it is an evolvement of is situation, right? So action is also a kind of is, but there's a bit more to it. Well, let's just keep it that way, right? For simplicity. So violence is an action plus X, but as he has not defined what X is, he can't talk about it as violence. You need to point out the delineation. What is it that I attach to this action that makes it become violence, right? Just go through every single description from any philosopher, right? You cannot find anybody talking about an is or an action where they add something that turns it into violence, right? Or immorality, right? There is nothing you can point to, right? except if you have made a moral principle that points out what that X is. Nobody has done it. Stefan Molyneux hasn't done it, right? That's what you have to do. You have to have something to attach, or at least mentally to say, well, that's why it is. And it's the same thing, the same situation, the same objects, the same individuals in another different situation might be perfectly moral, while in a very similar situation at another point in time may be immoral. That might depend on the wants of the participants in that situation, right? Or how they consider how it should be performed. That may not be the same, even if everything else is the same from an empirical standpoint, right? Okay, so let me see if I can say, when you are talking about violence, right, you are actually jumping into the immoral side of things and discussing things from that point of view. But exactly because we are on the immoral side, morality has already been eliminated, because we have found the X. Now we are on the immoral side, right? And that's what morality is. It's about finding the X. It's not looking at how to use violence on the other side, right? Morality is about finding the X, right? That's what morality is about. That's what ethics is about, finding that moral principle that can point out that X, so you don't arrive on the immoral side of things, right? That's where you don't want to be, right? So what he does is he goes over on the so to say the immoral side and talks about violence as if we know what that is. He hasn't pointed out what it is, and he possibly can't, right? So if the X is not identified, then what he calls violence isn't actually violence. It's just an action, right? It's merely an action. He just labels it as violence. And then he doesn't even do that. He just pulls out the word violence as if that's what you can do. As if violence is something that is objectively observed in the real world, right? It can't be his own personal opinion, because I don't have his personal opinion when I walk around my place, right? He's in Canada. How could I possibly have any idea of what he feels and thinks? So he can't impose his idea of violence immediately everywhere for all times, so people understand what violence is. It's impossible. It's a violation of Hugh's Isard gap, where he talks about violence as if it's experiential. He can't do that. All he can say is there's an action here, and then there's action there, and there's an action there. People, as I said in the earlier in the part one, is that people will flock together with somebody who is crazy enough to say, I know where that X is. The X is where I want it to be, right? And then they say, yes, that's right. And then we'll go to say those who are on the wrong side of that X, they're bad people, and we will take their stuff, or else they will be killed, right? So that's the crazy human understanding of how morality works, at least to some extent, right? Or they accept it that way. That's how it's running now. It can't work. It's ridiculous, right? But the point is, nobody has ever found the X, right? Every time people say that they found the X, and when you look at it a little closer, you find out, oh, they're just jumping over the gap without explaining the X, right? They're making some kind of justification, which is mostly like they are linguistic tricks or something like that. And again, the point is with this presentation is that morality stops when the X has been found, right? Or determined. You have to figure out how to find the X, the ethics and morality and philosophy and so on. Fine. That hasn't been done. When you have that, you can find out when the X is occurred, or at least you sort of predict that the X is close, and then you back off, so to say, right? And when the x has been identified, morality is no longer in play, right? It's no, you stay on the moral side. That's why you need the x's, to stay on the moral side, right? You don't want to be taken advantage of. So you stay on the moral side, on the green side of the x line, right? You don't want to jump into the other side and say, well, I can shoot this and I can shoot that and I can shoot the other, right? You want to stay on the moral side. And the delineation between the two is exactly why that moral principle is so freaking important, right? It's so unbelievably important. That's the total focus of what philosophers should do all the time, all day, right? Even for free, right? So, okay, I think that's enough. I will stop here, and I hope it makes sense. If this is a bit sort of a little too sort of complex or anything, please write a comment, and I will be glad to answer any questions. So, have a nice day. Thank you very much for stopping by, and see you next.